as it happens in real life, Raj will disappoint Simran because men are disappointing, especially when they're married. And what's interesting in Kabhi Ha Kabhi Na, there's that stunning sequence, right, when he's in church and he knows
Yeah.
he has to let go of the girl, right, and the ring is
The ring.
lost, and he looks at his sister, and you I don't think that sense of rejection, and to fully feel that sense of rejection and to tell the audience that there is honor in feeling rejected. I really felt when I was writing this book that I knew there were many women who were like me when I was in my 20s or early 30s who were feeling very low and lonely because of the circumstances that the economy and the Indians and our families were putting us through and our love lives were putting us through. And I wanted to tell them that, hey, I share in your experience. And it was an act of love. May there be only disco and no dard for everyone.
I think I'm a little less cynical. Like I had a little bit cynicism I had earlier. I was like, oh, Aman must be so annoying in this, like he's just telling Nana what to do and all.
Yeah.
But then I was like, oh, he's like, look at how much he's giving also in this world. There's a man that's
Yeah.
dying and he's spending so much time just doing this. Maybe he could have survived if he went to the hospital a little bit more, because he keeps like leaving to go help out Nana and her family.
Yeah, but I have to say, for me, that movie, and now when I watch it, and there are two things that just constantly just jump out at me. One is the sheer tightness of everyone's pants in the songs, right? Like just it's like a very
Closet one. Yeah.
hangover of the
Yeah.
90s. It hasn't really
Yeah.
ended. You can see it. I mean, I dare you to find me such tight clothing on men now
Oh my
in
God.
sort of those songs, and especially that it's the time to disco, and especially
I
what's
was
sad,
just thinking.
more than what I think you're seeing on
Yeah.
SRK. And the other is that horrid "Chhe Din Mein Ladkiyan" thing. I still,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I watch that and it gives me, like, I have an allergy to it, so I pretend that I didn't hear it.
So the Chedan Ladkiyan one is interesting because I obviously hate that as a concept. I was like, that's horrible. But the way it's shot is so fun. So like watching the scenes are very fun, because then you have like randomly Uday Chopra shows up and he's like day
Yeah,
6. I just like
yeah,
that whole format of it.
yeah,
Yeah.
Obviously the
yeah,
concept is insane.
yeah.
But
Yeah,
yeah.
and it is, I think it's amazing, actually. It actually speaks to something that at least I've noticed when I talk to so many women about Shah Rukh Khan, is that there are so many things that I know we would never forgive another straight, man in our culture, that I think we forgive him as an icon. And I think it's obviously because there's like this giant body of work. There's also the fact that so many people would keep telling me, right, that it's the interviews that constitute his celebrity as much as it is the wonderful movies that he's made and the beautiful songs and all of that. But it is interesting because, so many people would say to me, we didn't like him when he said X or when he said Y, right? And yet I doubt that it, especially in our contemporary times, when everything is sort of viewed in this binary of toxic, non-toxic, things like that. I don't think, we'd forgive another icon some of those kind of, the kinds of dialogue. And it's not him writing the dialogue, it's coming from
Yeah.
somewhere else. But, it's just that imagery, right? And it's fascinating to me. And I think it's one of the things that it always teaches me is that I am definitely one of those people, and you may not like hearing this too much, but I think we overanalyze too much of our kind of media culture. I
Yeah.
think you should. Sometimes I feel like a beautiful piece of art is a beautiful piece of art, and people should experience it, and people will view it in different ways. I think what social media kind of encourages us to do is to impose the way we see it as sort of this cool progressive way of seeing things, and often people view things very differently, and DDLJ is another great example of that. I think, Karan, you've read the book, you have a sense of this, which is someone in very, very small village in Uttar Pradesh who's like the first woman in her family, Muslim girl, to ever work, earn an income outside the home, loves that movie, and she's a revolutionary, honestly, in her
Yeah.
village. And I'd encourage people to read the book to read about her. And what's fascinating is when I asked her about DDLJ, which we view, especially even from a distance now, in the distance of time, as a parts of the film still appear as problematic, right? This idea that you
Yeah.
need
Mm.
someone's permission to marry, and the role of patriarchy in a woman's life and controlling a woman's life. And what's fascinating is, that scene between Raj, Simran, and her father, and the idea that Raj says, "I'd rather wait for approval than run away with you." To
Yeah.
Mm.
us, to many of us, it may seem problematic and an assertion of patriarchy. But to this young woman in this village in UP who I was talking to, who's obsessed with this movie, she said it was the most progressive thing that she'd ever seen. And I was really confused. And I thought, how could that be? And when I asked her, she said, well, if at the end, as it happens in real life, Raj will disappoint Simran because men are disappointing, especially when they're married. Husbands
Mhm.
are disappointing. And if there's a fight, or if there's violence, or if the love fades away, and Simran needs to fend for herself, we don't really live in a culture or a society where women can even find safe housing on their own, forget safe transport. And this is coming from a woman who obviously occupies a fairly precarious place when it comes to her access to public space in India, right? Like North India is not wonderfully safe
Mm.
for women. It still doesn't continue
Yeah.
to be. You just need to look at the news to know that. And in that world, she actually felt the fact that Raj was trying to win the approval and the affection of Simran's father over was actually a really wonderful thing, because what it meant to her was, should there be a fight between Raj and Simran, she can always go back to her own home. And she was
Mm.
basically saying that if you run away, you lose access to that kind of safety net of your own family, which honestly, Karan, for me, was such an unusual way of thinking about that sequence, right? And that film. I mean, it's actually the way game theorists and economists would think about exit options and bargaining
Yeah.
and so on. But
Yeah.
that's essentially what she was saying. So I do think that it always reminds me that we just view things so differently. And I think it's wonderful that there should be so many diverse perspectives. So I'm sure someone someday will tell me that "Chhe din mein ladki in" has some other connotation for them. And we'll find out.
Yeah. That somehow it's progressive. That somehow it's for her benefit that he's doing
I'll,
this.
yeah, I'll bring one of my favorite things. I think once I was at a seminar and we were discussing demonetization, and Professor Raghuram Rajan was one of the speakers, and he's one of our greatest, best economists. And someone, I think some young man from a business school or something, said to him, "But sir, demonetization was this wonderful thing." And he said,
Yeah.
"Son, you'll have to come up with a new kind of economics to explain to me how demonetization was a wonderful thing," if I remember correctly. And honestly, for Chairman Mein Ladki In, I think we'll have to come up with a new kind of progressive politics to figure out how that can be progressive. But who
Yeah.
Yeah.
knows? Someone may.
Yeah.
I was grappling with this thing too about, do we forgive some things that Shah Rukh does? Like when I was watching it, I was like, if it was another actor, I would really not enjoy a lot of the things that he's doing here. So I'm like, I'm always questioning, what is it about like Shah Rukh Khan's brand of love that I'm like, this is toxic, but it's fine because I get it. And,
Yeah.
like I'm trying to explain it in my head. But if it was another actor, and like, there's a new wave of like, these films like Kabir Singh and those type of films where it is like, again, like a very extreme toxic brand of love.
Yeah.
I just wonder, like, there's a lot of early Shah Rukh Khan films where he is acting very toxic in ways
Yeah.
that honestly is also seen in Kabir Singh, but I don't know what it is. Like I'm like, okay, no, this makes more sense at least to me.
Yeah, a couple of things. I do think so. I do think that often when we think about the way lots of us engage with these images, right? we tend to kind of infantilize the way people view things. I mean, everyone is as smart as all of us here are, and everyone can see him, stalking a woman in a movie and throwing some woman off a bridge or a building, sorry, in Bazigar, and can recognize that those are really morally questionable acts, right? And those are horrid, and yet they can enjoy him in the songs in those movies. So many women will tell me that some of the songs from Dar still stay with them. Tu Mere Samne is still everybody's, so many people's favorite, right? It's a lovely song, and yet they can take distance. So I do think that there's people have agency, right, in the way they can engage with these images, and I think that his imagery in particular, I think, reminds us of that. And I think the wonderful Paramita Vora, right, like she writes about sort of analyzing, not analyzing, but enjoying his celebrity. And one of the things she says, which I really really resonates with me, is this idea that he kind of defies this, toxic, non-toxic, problematic, non-problematic, this binary making, right? He's sort of beyond that. And the reasons for that are so many. I mean, one part of the reason is obviously the way these films are made and the kind of history into which these films are made. I mean, I think all of us also attach a lot of nostalgia, right, onto these movies. We were a certain age when these films came out. We'd never seen an actor perform these kinds of acts before. Now, when I watch Kabir Singh, sadly, he reminds me of so many guys you'd meet like on dating apps, like the toxicity, right? It's sort of, there's nothing, it now just feels like it's a kind of aggression that seems to be just around us, like a larger crisis of masculinity. But I think when Dar was coming out, or when Bazigar was coming out, we were occupying a very different space, right? And I do think that there's a kind of nostalgia that, for a lot of us at least, born in the early 1980s and the 1970s, I think there's that, right? But the other part, which I think I can probably speak to much more than the way the films are made, because I don't come at it from like a film studies or a, that kind of lens, is much more just, I think, for a lot of audiences watching him, he just has always provided this imagery of so much relief from the traditional, very stoic masculine that so many women seem to have to contend with in their lives. Not only women, men as well. I think it's actually true. I think everyone's kind of tired of the, the really stuffy, stoic patriarch, right, in the family. And I think he's always been he's an antidote to that. And one of the ways I capture this, in the book, for example, is I measured, Karan, dialogue time in movies, right? How much do women speak and how much do men speak? And the interesting thing I found was that even in his, so-called, you can call them soppy, silly, regressive, whatever you want to call them, like these big romances, women speak nearly half the dialogue. In fact, much more so in Karan Johar's movies. Those are the films where women really they have the most amount of dialogue. And not just like the female lead, but her mother, her sister, her best friend, people around her. And he is always listening, right? He plays these men who are quiet, they are not interrupting, they are listening, which is such a difference, right? From, I think, a lot of the traditional ways in which men and women dialogue in film and also in real life, where I think a lot of young women particularly feel that they're interrupted a lot, they're not taken seriously, their feelings are not taken seriously, and then they don't feel seen or they don't feel heard, they don't feel recognized. And I think he's always been an antidote to that. And you see it in the data, you certainly see it in the way we experience the images. There's a kind of welling up that happens, which I don't think very few actors, I think, in the world can produce that feeling of, even now when I watch Donkey, for instance, those scenes between him and Taapsee Pannu, like he can just make you cry like that, right? And there's something, I just think that is, we should also call it what it is. It's talent. I hate it when people never credit Mr. Khan with that the actual talent to do this. Because, I have friends who are, RADA trained actors, and I've asked them so many times, can you do that, can you instigate in us that sense of deep feeling with just your arms wide open, or the look that he has, right? The way the eyes tear up. And it's close to impossible. It's really difficult to do. You can't replicate it. We've seen many actors try and replicate it, and it looks foolish. And so I think it's talent. It's also the fact that the films are made at a certain time in our country's history, and they're made in a certain way. And then I think overarching to me is the fact that he just is such a strong antidote to conventional norms of masculinity
Yeah.
for both men and for women. That I think he just offers that, which is why I think, to your point, Karan, about we watch these films and you kind of think, well, 6 din mein ladki in, but then the next scene is so beautiful, right? And you kind of,
Yeah.
and the overarching arc of his career and what he's trying to tell us about the frailty of love and the vulnerability of men and humans is much beyond just, some of these utterances and some of the things that he's done or stalking women, right? That it goes beyond that. And I think that's largely to me what it is. Um, and I do think, I mean, we just have to also confess that he's the sexiest man alive. So that really helps.
That's true. That's a big
Like
factor.
you
Yeah.
can't, I think that certainly has a hold. And, so many women would tell me across class, faith, region. And, in the book, I follow women from so many different parts of the country. So many women would tell me that, if I would forgive him lots of things. Because just look at that smile, or look at the eyes, look at the way the gestures are made, particularly towards women. And I think that has a large part to play.
Yeah, I think it's also in his response to rejection, or like to someone telling him, pushing him away. Like
Yeah,
Karan and I have talked about the idea of him flirting with the fine lines of being creepy, and like sort of claiming his space also into the dynamic with the other person. And so when
yeah,
he's pushed away or he's called out, his response is very self-depreciating. Like there's this famous line, I think, from Yes Boss, where Juhi Chawla says, "Tum aadmi ho ya bandar," and his response is, "Tumhe kya pasand hai?" Like he puts
exactly.
her
Yeah,
in
yeah,
the center of it all, like rather than letting his ego kind of. So that kind of vulnerability, and I think the absence of, like, he plays with the fine line of being narcissistic and also like not letting the ego come in the way of it. So I think, yeah, that plays quite a big role.
It also
yeah,
like
and
changes his life, right? It changes his full life to
yeah,
we were watching Veer Zara, so that nostalgia film festival that's happening.
yeah,
Aniket and I went and saw Veer Zara, and it was incredible,
yeah,
obviously. But there's I realized at some point, I'm like, yeah, this is because like love entered his life, and he decided that this is the
it,
foremost thing for him.
yeah,
This is it.
yeah,
This nothing,
this is it.
and this happens so often. It happened in Donkey. It just happened just
Yeah, yeah,
in the
yeah.
last movie that happened.
To allow love to be the central transformational force for a man in a culture where we keep telling men power, money, like all the kind of manifestations of power are supposed to be what transform you and accelerate you and move you in life. It is such a refreshing phenomena, right? It's just so different. And to allow love to transform you that way, and your circumstances. And I mean, you see this, I mean, if you think about it, even from Raj and DDLJ all the way up to Dunki, you see this, right? It's always this, that there's an encounter and there's a giving yourself to that encounter completely and fully, right? And allowing it to change you as opposed to trying to play cool with it. Although I think his characters sometimes try to play cool with it, but he does this wonderful, I challenge actors to try and sort of play vulnerable coolness the way he does, because he's cool, and yet to Aniket's point, he's also, there's always this emotion, right? And there's a constant feeling and a sense of feeling, which he's constantly conveying to us as an audience. And I challenge anyone to be able to manage that balance. I think it takes an actor in many decades to be able to sort of achieve that. And I think we are very fortunate to be living in an era where we've been able to actually see this come together with his co-stars, the musicians. I do think music plays a huge role in this,
Oh yeah.
in the way the build up and what we feel when we watch this. And I think I'm just very fortunate. I think all of us are very fortunate to be living at a time when we've experienced this and watched it sort of, this journey grow. And I think
The vulnerable coolness thing is quite interesting, because in Kalona Ho, after the Chedan Ladkiyan that we spoke about, and the diary moment, which I watch. So the diary scene I watch like monthly actually. I go back and I watch that scene. I watch it all the time. I'm obsessed with it. We can sometimes, when like Aniket and I are recording, I make him say the dialogue to get in the zone of like recording. We know each other, we know it by heart. But after that, after that, there's a moment where he's like standing by that phone booth, and Rohit comes up to him, and he's like, this is what girls like. So he's trying to be all cool. The girls like this, so I said it and whatever. And then he pretends to like, oh, I have to make a call or whatever. And then
Yeah.
you see that he's crushed like seconds after just pretending to be like, yeah, I said whatever, immediately to switch into like full devastation. I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, you can't, this is stuff you can't pull off, right? It is about talent, right? There's a talent that sometimes we do discount. You're right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I met her, I have to tell you, and I keep, as you can probably imagine, this happens to me a lot. I met a foreigner recently, and she lives in Delhi, and she said, oh, like, how can you like Shah Rukh Khan? Like, that man, what like, she just could not understand. And to her, he was just sort of this caricature, right, of some a Bollywood caricature. And I realized that I do think he speaks to a very Indic tradition of feeling and narrative, and I wish more people could sort of honestly take it, watch it, engage with it, and take it seriously for what it is, because it's very hard to do. It's bloody hard to do, a Jawan or Dunki or any of these movies, right? I mean, the craft involved is just, I don't think it's something that can be easily replicated. But to your point about vulnerable coolness, my favorite story, I think, in that kind of genre is Kabhi Haan Kabhi Na, which is one of his earliest films. I have a poster of the movie in my house. It's my favorite, and I think probably with Donkey. Like, I love Donkey and I love Kabhi Haan Kabhi Na. Those two are, like, I think, my favorites. And what's interesting in Kabhi Haan Kabhi Na, there's that stunning sequence, right, when he's in church and he knows he has to let go of the girl, right, and the ring is lost, and he looks at his sister, I don't think that sense of rejection, and to fully feel that sense of rejection, and to tell the audience that there is honor in feeling rejected, that this is not some shameful, terrible thing that means that you have, you are less of a human, or you need to be, cast aside. I mean, to kind of own your sense of rejection, to display it, to engage with it. And then there's that whole beautiful sequence at the end of the movie where he's just sitting on a pavement, right? And to me, I know of people who have used those scenes as therapy. I mean, there's a woman in my book, we call her Gold. She was a in-flight attendant, very lonely and dealing with a lot of heartbreak in her life. She'd run away from home, and she really was alone, and bad boyfriends, terrible dating market, living on your own, missing your family, feeling like you're disembedded from everything that you knew, right, like, which was your home and family. And suddenly she's thrown into a world in Gurgaon. She's on her own, and what does she do? She constantly watches Kabhi Haan Kabhi Na and a documentary of Mr. Khan that Nasreen Munni Kabir had made with her colleagues. And that nurses her back to emotional health, because I think it's precisely this vulnerable coolness, but accepting the humanity in all of us, and to say, in life, not everything will go your way. That's perfectly fine. In fact, to celebrate it is probably going to help you in the long run. And I think I love Kabhi Haan Kabhi Na, because I think I've read interviews of him as well, where he says he was the best loser to play, right? Like, he sort of
it's his favorite. It's his favorite film, he says.
His favorite loser. And to me, I think it's such a beautiful film that reminds us that each one of us will win and lose at different things and different stages in life, and you just have to honor it as opposed to run away from it and not acknowledge it. And I think that sequence, particularly in the church, when he looks at his sister, and you can tell, the rejection is flooded. I mean, it's flooding his face. That sense of loss. I just think it's so beautiful. And again, it's just one of these wonderful displays of hustling for approval, but eventually realizing that the only person who can actually give you that approval is you yourself. And you have to sit there with yourself on a pavement, with all your ugly thoughts and all your sense of rejection, and deal with it. And then maybe Juhi Chawla will come, but it's totally fine.
Maybe.
In this context, what do you think of? Sorry?
No, go ahead, Aniket. Go ahead.
No, go for it, Karan. So I was just like, in this context, what do you think of Rabne Banadi Jodi? Because he's
Ah,
kind of fitting with the character similarly, right?
yeah. So I want to say actually my favorite love story in Rabde Banadi Jodi, and I think this is now an increasingly common view, is the one between Surinder Sani and Bobby, his best
I
Yeah.
knew
friend.
you were gonna say that.
Yes,
To
absolutely.
me, that actually the real story to me, much more than what's happening between him and
Yeah.
Tani, is much more what is happening between him and his best friend.
Yeah.
Because I remember going into the cinema hall to watch that movie, and I don't think I'd ever seen in a very long time, men talking about being macho. Do you remember that entire sequence
Oh, the
where
macho sequence is
Bobby
one of
gives
my
him a
favorites.
crash course? And it's
Yeah.
very funny. I mean, it's just, I
Mm,
think Vinay Pathak is just, sheer genius in that
Amazing.
movie. I mean, he
amazing.
just, he just says, what does it mean to be macho? And they're mocking it, but they also want to be it. It's sort of, it's this mix.
Yeah.
Mm,
And I'd never seen in Hindi cinema in such a long time, and that sort of big budget, typical romance,
Yeah.
story, masculinity being discussed in such an open
Yeah.
way, right? And what is that movie? So to me, that movie is fundamentally about the rejection of this very flashy masculinity and
Yeah.
self acceptance, because in the end, I think he needs to accept the Surinder in himself and let go of this desperate urge to be Raj, right? To be flashy and
mm,
flamboyant. And to me, I mean, honestly, the woman, strangely enough, is somewhat incidental. I mean, I do think actually this is true for some of these love stories, which is, I do think sometimes the men are essentially coming to terms with their own sort of arc for self acceptance. And I do think Rabde Banadi Jodi plays some part of that.
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's one love story in that movie that really strikes me. And the other love story that really strikes me in that movie is actually uh, something that someone I followed for my book told me. And it's interesting. She's a live-in domestic worker from Jharkhand. She'd moved to Delhi, and she never had a TV. She never watched a full film before she came to Delhi. And she happened to watch some of the songs from Rabne Banadi Jodi and fell in love with those songs. I think she'd watched them on TV while she was working. And one day, when typically on cable television, there'd be a Sunday, and then they'd show a Shah Rukh film. She happened to watch Rabne Banadi Jodi, and she had to take permission from her employers to see if she could just sit in front of the TV and cut vegetables and do her work. And her employers were expats, and they allowed her to do it. They said, "Sure, you can watch a movie," because she felt going to a cinema hall was too exorbitant, and she was watching the film many years after it had come out. I think a few years after, at least. And she said to me, after we were talking about that movie, and to her, the ultimate love story was between Surinder Sani and the tiffin and the plates that his wife would sort of create for him. And the
Yeah.
love story was actually a love story between a man truly valuing the labor of care and cooking and
Yeah.
cleaning and, domestic labor. And she said to me, and it's a quote and it's in the book, she said, if every man loved the tiffin that, his wife makes for him the way Surinder loves his tiffin, right? So
Mm,
many women's lives would be so much better. And I
Yeah.
think it's something that makes me very emotional when I think about it. And it stayed with me for a very long time. And so to me, Rabne Banadi Jodi is actually not perhaps the love story between, that supposed triangle between Raj, Surinder, and, Tani. uh, and the fact that it's such a joke, right? Like the difference between Surinder and Raj. Like I just find that
yeah.
funny. But to me, it's two other love stories. The one between Bobby and Surinder, and what
Yeah.
that says about masculinity, and the other one is between this Tiffin. And you see him so much in the kitchen in that movie, and so many of the beautiful songs and in the sequences.
Yeah.
And men. And I think that's really what I like. I'll never forget that. Actually, now when I watch the movie, that's sort of always what really jumps out at me. I actually watch that scene about being macho a lot. Uh, Anytime I get irritated or something, it always makes me laugh and it centers me in a funny way. I just think that between the two of them, between Mr. Khan and Vinay Pathak, is just this beautiful combination, just the way they've done it. And it's almost
Yeah.
like they're doing a musical, and it's partly
Yeah.
musical, but just the way it's done, it's just beautiful. And the dialogue is so clever.
Yeah, I love Rabne's. It's interesting because when I first saw it, I was just like, yeah, this is a good movie. It's a nice film. And then we rewatched it for the podcast, and I was like, oh my god, this is Shah Rukh Khan fighting with himself. Like he's Shah Rukh Khan versus the image of Shah Rukh Khan. Like
Yeah,
Surinder
yeah,
Sahni is literally going, hey,
yeah,
Raj from DDLJ, what if we kind of competed? And what if I deconstructed everything I had set up? And I remember just messaging Aniket like, dude, like this is one of his finest performances. Like I don't know why it just kind of slipped under the cracks, because it's kind of a brave film too, right? Like Aditya Chopra makes a film that deconstruct his most famous hero. Like Raj is from DDLJ is
yeah,
like iconic for the 90s, and they went, actually that's not who is the ideal person you should
yeah,
aspire for. So
yeah.
I love it for that reason.
No, I
Personally.
completely, and that's also, when I was saying earlier, right, like this radical call for self-acceptance. To me, maybe this is such a philosophical stretch, but I always feel that that is always what is central to all Shah Rukh Khan films. It's all the people he has played in death or in love or in a happy ending or on a pavement or in a dance competition. I think these are all men in quest to accept the humanity in themselves and not buy into the sort of flashy scripts of masculinity that the market and society imposes on us. And I think if you view actually so many of his films, to me, they always strike me as that arc of a man
Yeah.
who's struggling to accept himself and accept his own desires, accept what he wants. And
Yeah.
to me, Surinder versus Raj is a very beautiful example of that, because in a way it is the idea that you have to let go of this desire to be flamboyant, flashy, and sort of this version of yourself that wore chains that said cool, right? I mean, let's not forget that. Although that's Rahul, but still
Iconic.
almost the
Yeah.
same idiom. And accept yourself with your ill-fitting pants and the woman you love, and accept that and celebrate it, and she will too, as you see that in that's the arc in that movie. So yeah, I to me it's such a it's another beautiful call for just self-acceptance.
The grand gestures versus the simple everyday acts kind of a thing. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and also like your next project is around the tyranny of Indian uncles, right? And Surinder Sahni is kind of in the uncle territory, but where do you think he's different from what the living experiences that you have been coming across?
So I think the one of the things, the reason actually I should just perhaps take a step back and say that the reason I decided I wanted to work on Indian elite middle-aged men, and sort of the term catch-all phrase uncle, is because I think actually precisely for the reasons we're talking about, I think so many of these men have bought into these extremely aggressive ideas of what a man should be. He should be in control. He should sort of always be number one. There are these very conventional, stuffy, and suffocating ideas of the masculine that I think these men have grown up with. They're much older than all of us, and I think there are generational reasons for that. And so to me, Surinder Sahni will never fit that definition, because if you watch the dialogue between himself and Tani, he's so self-aware of his feelings. He's not ashamed of them. He expresses them. The way he talks to Bobby about his feelings. Whereas I think to me, the kind of dominant, very suffocating masculine is one where men are supposed to pretend to not have feelings, or if they have feelings, they just discuss them when they're extremely drunk and in basically very aggressive, violent ways, or through sarcasm or cynicism, right? Like that sort of. And women have adopted these modes too, so it's sort of, I think it's cross sex, but to me, that's why Surinder would never be an uncle, right? Because he owns his own vulnerability and he's so open about it. And so yeah, it's interesting how so many of the men that I'm interviewing are all actually Mr. Khan's age. They're in sort of their late 50s. But I do think, to me, what in my at least conceptual framework, the men I think who do a lot of harm to themselves and to other men and to other women and to everyone are those who are kind of denying their own feelings, be it rage, be it rejection, be it anything, ugly feelings. We all have them, and are trying to evade having to deal with their feelings by asserting control constantly, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think Mr. Khan has ever played a character quite like that.
Yeah.
And maybe he will, and that'll be interesting. I
Yeah.
really actually want to watch him now. And what I really want him to do is not Don, but Don Draper. I keep saying this, but
Awesome.
I don't care. Like,
There's
I
Don
think,
Draper behind. Like I have a Don Draper
He's a
painting.
big fan. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I would love to watch him play something Grey again as just a
Yeah.
lay fan. I should put that
Same.
out there. I think it was Uday Bhatia recently. He had a review for Donkey, and I disagree with everything he said in that review because I love that
Yeah.
movie. But there was one thing he did say which I did agree with, which is I think now we see Mr. Khan as the sort of feminist, nationalist, like great warrior for the people and progressive ideas, which is wonderful and so much fun. But I would love to watch him play a bad guy, or
Yeah.
someone who operates in that morally dubious space, because I think he just does that so beautifully.
Yeah. The only sorry, Karan, I'll just take one. The only pun which I had over there were those uncles are into power structures, and Surinder Sahni is into Punjab power, lighting of your life.
Yes.
So that's the only like, close thread that they share.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the
yeah.
only power game that I think Surinder is playing.
Yes.
That's very well put.
I'm also
Absolutely.
I'm maybe a little bit less high on, like, as much as it's a weird thing with Shah Rukh Khan, because I'm always like, I'm very happy that you're doing well and these films are doing well, but obviously my like idea of the ideal Shah Rukh Khan film is either a romantic film or a gray character. So I'm also kind of leaning towards that, because I've rewatched Bazigar and Dar, and it's and Dawn, and it just comes so, it's the line, maybe it's what Aniket's saying, it's like the line between creepy and like romance, when he leans into it and the film is also leaning into it, it just works just like really, really well. So I would love like a villainous Shah Rukh. That'd be
Yeah,
great.
or I mean, look, if we're going to do this, we can just put our wish list out there, right? And
We should do
maybe,
it. Yeah.
we should just. I think we should actually. I really think, Karan, you should solicit this from just everyone, and we should create this one little list,
Yeah.
and we should send it to Miss Pooja Dadlani or someone. They can ignore it because he will do what he wants to do, but at least he'll know
Yeah.
what the fans are saying. And I think, to me, I completely concur with what you said about a villainous role or someone morally dubious. But I would also just love to see him in this, I don't know, like a Bridges of Madison County style love story with Tabu or with Kajol. I mean, women of his own kind of, era and generation.
Yeah. Tabu's
I
the
think-
name that I keep going back to. I'm like, yeah, they've not done that. They've never visited that, I think. I think in
Yeah.
Satya, there was a brief, like they were a couple, but they're
Yeah,
just
they
such
were.
a small part of the film.
Yeah.
But I would love that. That would be so good. What if they
Yeah.
both were evil?
Yeah.
And like a Makbul almost style, like both of them are kind of grayer characters and they both are egging each other on, but also in love. I'm combining two things. I'm combining the romance and I'm combining the villainy, putting it
Yeah,
together.
I think you should. It's time, Karan. I think you should start writing the script and send it.
I'm
And
gonna
who
write it.
knows?
Yeah.
It might
Oh,
actually.
we will have something for you. Like we are talking about something on that front.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But the question which I have in that context is like, what is the evolution of love for us in that dynamic? Because when I look at Rab Ne Bana Di Jodi, funnily, I also think it is a love story for atheists as well. Because the title talks, it will be Rab who makes your Jodis and all that. But it is about simple everyday acts. It's like when we watched it for the podcast, it felt very much the ideas of bell hooks, what she talks about, love being a verb and not a noun, and
Yeah.
sort of the dabba which you're talking about, and the act of doing that, and the ways in which Shah Rukh Khan or Surinder shows her the love in the movie. So like when I was thinking about our discussion also, I was thinking of this upsetting question of like, we have projected all these ideas of longing and yearning which collectively we had as a society onto this icon and all that. How are we kind of moving on from that? What is the evolution of love happening in our context? How are we making love more grounded, which in some ways I guess your book does? Like it shifts the gaze from the individual. Like people like Karan and I have grown up to the idea of individualistically to the idea of Shah Rukh Khan. Like this is what the idea of romance we are supposed to aspire to and all that. But what your book also does is it brings the collective in picture. Like,
Yeah.
here's the women across the strata of society, here's the void in their life of intimacy, of longing and all that, and how this fills it. So I was thinking of where does that move on to, or like how can we make love more grounded, or like how do we move on from Shah Rukh Khan to bell hooks in the Indian context?
Yeah. So, a couple of things, right? Actually, to me, one of the most beautiful a few lines in Hindi cinema about love is actually between Ranbir Kapoor and Shah Rukh Khan in Ae Dil Hai Mushkil.
Yeah.
I mentioned this in the book as well. There's this line where Shah Rukh Khan plays he's the ex-husband of Aishwarya Rai, right? And he says, he's Tahir Khan in the movie. He's an artist, and he says that he's talking to Ranbir, and Ranbir, I think, embodies this current contemporary culture of love is conquest, right? Love is my way or the highway. Love is I control you. Love is I own you. I possess you. Or that language, I think, of
Yeah.
extremely individualistic ideas where I often think we think love is like, I say this in the book, people think love is like buying a pair of shoes, like today I have Adidas and next day I have Nikes and things like that. Like, it's a very consumerist culture of love.
Yeah.
But, people are not fast moving consumer goods. People are people. And I think in response to that, because I think Ranbir asks Tahir Khan in the movie, he says, isn't it terrible when the love that you wanted you don't receive in return? And Tahir's response is, no, it's the greatest feeling in the world, because even if I have loved fully. And for me to love fully doesn't always require the other person to sort of meet my expectations, right? And even if there is no reciprocal love, at least we tried. And I think to me, the this very grounded idea of love is to think about love as not conquest or winning, or thinking of it in terms of binaries of, does he love me? Does she love me back? Do they love me back enough? Like sort of quantifiable measures. I think so much of this is about feeling fully and expressing that love fully. And in Donkey, there's a beautiful line where he says, we should be, he calls himself a namoona, right? He says that because there's this sequence where he's extremely drunk and he's yelling at like this person's home, asking why is it that this man does not let his daughters marry Indian Punjabi men as opposed to NRIs. And there's so much feeling in that, and you can tell he's actually processing his own romantic rejection from the past in that scene, because it's spoken to something that's happened to him in his life. And I always say, I think we should all be emotional namoonas. I think using that language, I think we should be open and honest and strong and brave enough about our feelings. And then when they are not reciprocated, celebrate and feel the honor of having those feelings, and I think that in itself is the ultimate joy. And if you think about what, great scholars on love, be it bell hooks or various other sociologists on care and on love, they teach us is love is, it's not a consumption activity. It's an activity to extend your empathetic abilities, right? To sort of feel that strongly for another person. And it could be your mother, friend, plant, animal, whatever. And so to me, I think the real question is, we have to liberate this idea of love from notions of romantic and sexual conquest, and celebrate not having our love always met, and feeling a bit down on ourselves. And to be honest, to feel good about feeling down on yourself is a very odd thing, but some of the best writers have told us that the greatest moments of inspiration come from there. And Shah Rukh Khan's films are beautiful because so many of his characters don't always get what they want, and yet they hold that so beautifully, right? Like, as I was giving you the example of Sunil and Kabhi Haan Kabhi Na, and what happens at the end of Donkey as well. And so to me, I think the real shift is just, it's not just about everyday acts of smaller gestures of intimacy, help in the kitchen, things like that. But I think to me, the real question is, you have to liberate this idea of love and romance from getting people, like this idea that I've got you and I'm of conquest. I think there's so much more to love than just that. And love is not, being lovable is not the same. I think one of my favorite writers on love is Eric Fromm. I'd encourage everyone to read his book, The Art of Loving. And one of the things he basically says is this idea that, there is a huge difference between being lovable and being powerful. And often we live in a culture where we conflated the two, where we think if you're powerful, then you'll be
Hmm.
loved. And I think it is all on us, each one of us, to not
Yeah.
treat love like some kind of hustle culture or a place where we're trying to get power and status. If I love X person, then it'll signal that I'm a really cool, fun person. I think you should love for you should honor your own feelings, and you should love for reasons that make you whole, as opposed to reasons that are status seeking or power enhancing, which I think sometimes we've got the two completely confused. And I think we're a generation that's trying to figure that out.
One of the films that I kind of see in tangent to, not tangent, but like it sort of is a great companion film for Kabhi Haan Kabhi Na for me, is Ek Main Aur Ek Tu. Because
Yeah.
I always just see, like, I thought that was such a nice film, and of course didn't get any sort of acclaim at that time that it came out. But again, it was not, Imran Khan's character in that doesn't get the love that he says, I love you, and she's like, hey, I don't feel that way, but that's okay, and the film's like, hey, but by the way, that's totally fine. And there's a flaw in the, crash the wedding and run away with the girl, or the happy ever after. Because even in The Graduate, for example, which is the iconic, the first time I feel like where they went, oh, that's that's not enough, because in The Graduate he crashes the wedding and then he runs away with the girl and they're sitting on the bus, and then there's a scene where it's like, what do we do now that we've done the
Yeah.
thing? That's the flaw in the whole conquest aspect of love.
Yeah.
Which is not in the love is a thing by itself, and just the act of loving is the real, secret to all this. Is that
Yeah.
it's just the fact that you are in love and enjoy that feeling,
Yeah. One of my favorite writers has this is Proust, and he has this wonderful line where he basically says all of life's greatest joys are in anticipation. And I think if you're excited about someone, or if you're excited about something, right? If you're enthusiastic in life, and I think especially in the world that we live in right now, I mean, you only need to just scroll online or look at a newspaper to know how much conflict and pain people are living through. I think at that time, if you wake up in the morning and the thought of a person or a thought of an animal, as I said, or the thought of a tree gives you happiness and it makes you come alive, I think to me that is love in this world. And to me, if you wake up in the morning and you cry a tear for the stories that you're reading in the newspaper, that is love for a common humanity we all share. And I'm much more interested in that notion of loving. I'm not on apps. I'll like die. I'm also too old. Like I'll die before I like do any of these things, I think. but that's my own bias. But I just feel like people are not consumer goods, and a culture of love that kind of encourages all of us to think of love as something we're transacting, that you give me X and I'll give you Y, and that's not love. That's not love to me. That's not the love that I'm interested in or I'm seeking. I'm seeking a love where every day I wake up and I feel strongly about some things. It could be principles, it could be things I'm reading in the news, it could be a person, it could be a combination of all these things.
Yeah.
And that to me is important. It's interesting. I'm sure you've heard this. Mr. Khan keeps saying this all the time. He says, I'm so hardworking. Like somebody asked him, what do you want to be remembered as? And he said, I want people to remember that he tried really hard. He said, I want people to remember that I tried bloody hard. What is that trying bloody hard, but not an act of love? Right? Like I wrote this book. It took me 15 years. I worked very hard on it. I'd like to believe. I think I did. And I continue to write, and there's an effort that you put in, right? And I have a regular day job, and I sort of set time aside. I don't have a grand social life because I enjoy writing. But what is that in service of? It is in service of this idea that I really felt when I was writing this book, that I knew there were many women who were like me when I was in my 20s or early 30s, who were feeling very low and lonely because of the circumstances that the economy and the Indians and our families were putting us through, and our love lives were putting us through. And I wanted to tell them that, hey, I share in your experience. And it was an act of love. It was a gesture of love to this sort of unknown mass of people. These are not people I actually know. But I worked very hard because I was motivated, to be honest, not because I genuinely thought only 6 people would read this book. I'm not joking. But I think I did this because I wanted it to be an expression of love towards Shah Rukh Khan, obviously, because I love him so much. I wanted him to know what he meant in our culture. I think he already knows. He didn't need a book, but I wanted a book to capture this. And I wanted to express love to all those women out there who I knew, much like myself, were feeling very lost, low, feeling like their self esteem was being diminished, feeling lonely, feeling cut up. And I wanted to tell them that there's a reason why this is happening, and we share in this as a culture together. And that is love to me. That's the love that interests me. Right now I'm busy interviewing what Aniket was calling uncles. And it is, again, to me, it is it's a gesture of love. I mean, I want to understand the world better because I feel something for it. And that set of curiosity is partly selfish, but it's also partly motivated by this belief that we have this shared humanity. And I think to share in it is to try and understand each other better, right, as opposed to misunderstanding each other all the time. And that to me is love. And that's why I feel that Mr. Khan is the ultimate icon of love, not because just the romance movies and the arms wide open and all of that, but because when he keeps saying I work bloody hard, he's working bloody hard for you, me, Karan, and Aniket, and everybody else. Those millions and millions of people who come, who he will never probably meet, but he's working hard for all of us because I think he wants to communicate with us, right? He wants us to share in a certain experience. I mean, it would be so easy for an actor to make cynical choices and do box office hits one after the other, but there's a reason he did Fan, right? There's a reason he did some of these movies that he chose to do. And that is a conversation that he wants to have with us. And to me, that is a gesture of love. And I think that's where I feel like effort, sustained effort. It sounds really boring, but sustained effort to try and understand something, to try and communicate something. That's love, what you're trying to do with these sets of conversations. And I think that's what's interesting to me. I'm not interested in this like acquisition oriented love where Ranbir Kapoor wants to have girls with certain pelvis sizes or whatever else it is. It's boring.
Man.
I find it odious, and I'm not interested in that culture at all.
Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, the
No,
Ranbir
go for
Kapoor
it, Karan.
point, man.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
Ranbir Kapoor thing is so sad because I
Who is
actually
that? Sorry, repeat that. I lost you. Sorry, say that again.
the Ranbir Kapoor thing is quite sad because I did see it as like I did see him sort of the characters he played early on in his career as a sort of successor to what could be like the modern love, because his first film, even though it wasn't my favorite, but Savarya is also about the fact that he just loved someone, and the sort of, I call it the Sanjuification of Ranbir Kapoor, but like it is a little sad because it's hard because I'm a big fan of his work early on, and I did think that there was some of that sort of giving yourself to love and being vulnerable in it, and now there's not as much. In fact, he's gone the other way. So yeah, it's a little bit disappointing, but yeah.
I will just say one thing, and I will not say to. I'm Team Ranveer. I think the
I love
meme.
Ranveer also. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I am very clear on this. I just feel like Ranbir Kapoor's character. I mean, someone will write that book. I know that there are already articles coming out. They're such man children. They refuse to grow up. It's all very boring.
Yeah.
Especially, I also just honestly feel I'm too old to kind of find that. I don't know. There's something. I really feel there's some generational shift. Like I think if you're I turned 40 recently, and I just feel like for women of a certain age, when you watch him, it just feels it's of a, I think it's speaking perhaps to something else, but I somehow can't relate to. I mean, certainly not the anger that you're seeing now in this sort of animal avatar, but even the past, I could never relate to these men. I didn't know who they were. I think younger people do. If I were Naina in that movie, the one where he's in it with
Ye
Aditya
Jawani.
Roy Kapoor, and yeah,
Yeah.
I would run in a matter of a second. I just don't get it. I don't get it at all. And whereas when I see, for example, Rocky or Rani Ki Prem Kahani, I mean, that's 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 an interesting character. I mean, to be able to do that, right? So I'm very clear on this sort of the spectrum.
You heard it here first. Ranveer over Ranbir. That's over.
Yeah, 100%. I don't
The
even.
line is drawn. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I
But
think there
it's
was
something-
yeah, Karan, go ahead. No, I was like, there's this survey which was done by Financial Times of how younger men are becoming conservative. I think John
Yes.
Murdoch did younger men
Yeah.
across the world are becoming more and more conservative, and women on the opposite side are like becoming more progressive and like opening up. So like Karan and I were doing this exercise of we were thinking if your book was for younger men, right, as opposed to like talking about the void of women, what would it be called? Like what would it be? Would it be desperately seeking something, or would it like be desperately shedding something? So yeah,
Oh,
what do you think?
that's
Yeah.
such an interesting question. I think it would be desperately acquiring something. Actually, sadly, I think to our fairly the theme of our whole conversation. Actually,
Yeah.
I do think that we live in a culture where, and this is not to sort of point fingers. This is like a joint crisis created by women, men, the whole the shebang of our society. We do live in a culture where particularly educated elite men really struggle with, I think, their own feelings. They struggle with the idea of femininity, of respecting someone who is very different from them. And you're seeing that, right, in our online culture, in our political culture. You're seeing it everywhere. And there is a lot of hostility, which, right from animal to just the discourse around us, you see it, right? I don't think I need to sort of explain it to anyone. You just need to live in India
Yeah.
just to observe our internet to know what I'm talking about. And I think in that world, somehow we've trained our young men as well. And I think some young men are pushing back against this. And I'm talking about a certain milieu of educated men who are somewhat comfortable also in anglicized cultures as they are in vernacular cultures. I think for a lot of these men, they believe that love, status, power are all the same. So you need to be sort of this big sahab, right? With this big army of followers, and then you're like a big man. And they all have this sort of, big man status seeking complex. And when you realize that even after all that status, love does not come, because love is not that, right? Then there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of resentment. And I think we are living through that culture. We are living through that. There's data that shows, for example, as women in particular start to work more, start to assert themselves more, much more, particularly in the economy, there is a backlash effect. I mean, economists have found it. Violence rates go up in those particular districts and areas. And I think for too long, we've just not had a public conversation about it. And I think women have had conversations about their own emotional health, their physical health. I think you see that conversation much more. But on men, I think, yes, now you have, some podcasts and there's like an increasing conversation. But I think that's also just largely some pockets of the internet. I don't think writ large we've talked about this crisis yet, this crisis of masculinity. We're definitely talking about the crisis of women not feeling safe, women not being economically independent enough. I think across the board, be it left, center, right, whichever way, whatever you may identify as, there is a recognition that this is a problem everywhere. But is that same recognition there if I say young men are really struggling with their psychological needs, with their, they have to be breadwinners, they have to, have abs, they need to be super successful, they need to be this, I don't think we're talking about what we're doing to young boys. And so I think if I wrote a book right now, was the sort of the countervailing force, what is happening to young men, the ones in their 30s. It would probably be desperately acquiring status, money, power, whatever it is. I think that's sort of the game, right? And many women, by the way, are desperately doing the same thing because that's sort of what we've been taught to do.
Capitalism.
I don't even know if it's capitalist. I just think that it's also safety. I think we've been taught that these are things, and I understand that. Of course, everybody needs to be materially secure. But our elite don't. I mean, this is far beyond. I mean, I'm almost talking like this is if I were to create a statistic, this would be sort of the top 10 to 12% of our country where you see actually this kind of culture very strongly. I mean, who's on the internet? It's not. It's very different, right? And I don't fault people actually who don't have as much material access or economic security if they have, very, very conservative ideologies, because maybe, that is what they need to sort of rely on to understand the world in which things are so unfair for them. So that I still, I can understand it. But honestly, when I look at our elite, and I've had so many experiences of this with the book, Aniket, Karan, I mean, I'll go for events and, men will start yelling at me and they'll say, ye aapka data hai on economic employment, but it's not my data, it's the government's data. This is not, someone privately doing this. I think the kind of fear around women having fun, I mean, that this is such a simple thing. And you see it. I mean, I've seen it even in the conversations around the book, how quick men are to judge a book called Desperately Seeking Shah Rukh. It's fascinating. Even if it has a Nobel laureate who's given it a blurb, it doesn't matter. It will be an unserious, silly book because it's got Shah Rukh and it's from the female gaze. And I think this complete disgust towards the female gaze, towards femininity, I think it's harming men actually much more, to be honest, than it, because I think women will be all right. We'll figure it out, and I think we've been managing for a while. But I think it's really harming men. And so I think it would be desperately acquiring something. We're all seeking Shah Rukh. So that I think
Desperately seeking sisterhood is the unsexy title I could come up with, but it wouldn't sell any copies. But yeah,
yeah, but so many people ask me this, and it's interesting. I have many friends who are sort of serious non-fiction readers, right? So there's like serious people. And they keep telling me, why'd you put Shah Rukh on the title? Would have just done, it would be taken, it would land much more seriously if it was not, didn't involve him. But number one, he is my research technique. I mean, you see in the book, talking about him gets people to talk about so much in their life, right? From their sex life to their loneliness to their economic journeys to being fearful that they don't have enough networks to do well for themselves. So many things. I don't think anyone else could have served as such a wonderful research device. If I just went and started directly asking all these women these questions, they'd just not talk to me. And so he created this space in the research. And to not acknowledge that would be the biggest lie. And I also felt somewhere I wanted to push back against this culture of what is considered serious. I think you need to take the concept in the idiom of Shah Rukh Khan fairly seriously. And I'm very happy recently. I noticed that there's this big shift in engagement in taking these kinds of conversations much more rigorously. Taking fun seriously, laughter, fun, joy, these are very important areas. They tell you a lot about who is truly suffering and what is inequality in our country. And I just hope that the book sort of, paves a path for more people to take these kinds of alternative paths to research. I mean, I wrote a book which is about women in the economy, but I wrote it through the lens of Shah Rukh Khan. And you can do that, right? You can do things differently. But I can tell you that it did then meet a huge backlash from men who are used to reading about women who are either achievers, so your champions, or women who are victims. But women who are having fun, and the idea that a woman can have fun from her own money and love Shah Rukh Khan and watch him on her own and in her own free time, and that actually can lead to social revolution. I think that's something that a lot of men, at least, I think, were struggling to accept. And, that's sort of the challenge that I set for myself.
I personally, I really like that you, for me, the blind spot is actually understanding economics, right? So for me, it's like, oh God, okay, through Shah Rukh Khan, oh, perfect. Yeah. This is how I learn about stuff. And I think even beyond Shah Rukh, that's what we do with films. I learned, and this is maybe this is speaking to my privilege as well. But when I was 13 and I watched Rang De Basanti, I realized, oh, okay. So you can criticize the government and you can think about things this way. And you have to, these things do impact the world. And that was my first understanding of it. And that I use films often as an entry point into understanding things that I don't, which is the whole, even our podcast, we're doing that, right? We'll watch a film, we're like, oh, these are characters that we've never met or we don't know, but this is a good entry point. And I think your book does that, right? It uses the lens of Shah Rukh Khan
Thank
as
you.
an entry point to go like, yeah, this is what people are going through, and it
Yeah.
actually will reach a wider audience for it, which is great.
Thank
That's the
you.
whole.
Yeah, no, mashallah, it's sort of, it's found its place, but I will always remember just it was, I must say, it was a difficult book to land, if you understand what I'm trying to say, because
Hmm.
there are very typical marketing filters that people have towards non-fiction books. So it's a
Yeah.
sad gender book about how things are really shitty for women in India. And then we tell that story through the lens of like someone who's achieved a lot, or we tell that story through someone who suffered a lot, right? Like that I think would be easier to sort of explain. But Shah Rukh Khan, economics, women, society, I think it took a little while, but I'm really grateful to readers and reviewers and people like yourself
Yeah.
who picked up the book, and the journey continues, and it reached Shah Rukh Khan himself, so that was a really wonderful thing.
Yeah.
That's
And
incredible. Yeah.
yeah.
The most iconic thing about it is it's a book on Shah Rukh Khan, perhaps the greatest star on earth, like of a country like India. And then the opening line is, "My life has been a heteronormative hell." I was like,
Yeah.
so like the moment they
Yeah.
in literature they talk a lot about the opening paragraphs of books and like opening lines, like put all the effort on your opening line and all that. The moment I read it, I was like, yeah. Though the first time when I read the title of the book, I got a feeling of, oh, it might be a tabloid read or something like that. I didn't
Yeah.
get a complete understanding of it. But the moment I read this first, I've noted it like somewhere, like because it doesn't matter what state of society you come from, what sexual orientation you have. All of our lives are heteronormative hell, and we are
Yes.
trying to traverse through that. So I was like, iconic line
Thank you.
to begin with.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Where like
My ex-boyfriends really enjoyed it. I can tell you. They loved it.
Yeah. My my favorite line is I don't know why it stuck out to me, but I think you said like, oh, I scroll through his, like you're talking about Shah Rukh Khan, and like I scroll through his social media and I wonder if he helps out in the kitchen. I remember
Yeah.
that line for some reason, because it is this marriage, right, of like his interviews and like him and his films, and I feel like it summed it up so well, because I do wonder about these things more than I wonder that about any other actor. So
So
that really stood out to me.
I believe he does, but I
Maybe
believe, I mean,
listen,
everything that I seem to
no.
see suggests that he does. So,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
thank you.
we hope. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. This was great. I feel like I don't know why I started with Kal Ho Na Ho for some reason, but
because we were talking about it before had right.
yeah, I just got obsessed with it. I was like, this is not the best launching point, because immediately I was like, oh yeah, Chedin Ladki, and
No,
by the way,
no, this was so much fun. Thank you so much.
No, but you have done a podcast with Amit Verma, right? Like The Seen and the Unseen, and which is
Yes.
titled "The Loneliness
Yeah.
of Indian Women." And I think along with its twin episode with Nikhil Taneja, "The Loneliness of Indian Men," I think both of them should be made compulsory in universities across India to kind of as a part of the syllabus, because they're such cultural anchor points.
Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Like I was listening to it, and then there's this, you talk about Eric Fromm and the art of loving and the idea of generosity of love, and I think the larger, when we were watching Veer Zara, the whole idea of how he captures towards the poem which he recites in the end. He's
Yes.
not just talking to the love of his life, who's probably for whom he has given the life, but also to all the small elements across
Yes.
that journey. So it's like
Yes.
really taking, your love, like I think in Bellhooks, one of the dedication is to Anthony, with whom I circle in the circle of love, and to everyone else as
Yeah.
well. So
Yeah.
that, I think, in the end, like really kind of sums up the idea of generosity, which all of us have grown up with and like kind of love Shah Rukh Khan for. And
Yeah.
yeah, like very
No,
fascinating conversation with you. Yeah.
thank you, Aniket. No, but I'll just, the last thing I'll say, I'm so glad. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to the two of you for this fun conversation, and also for just engaging with
Yeah.
the book and seems the podcast previous to. And I'm just going to say that I think we are very fortunate recipients of the generosity of Shah Rukh Khan. And
Absolutely.
I'm very grateful that I can right now Google and find wonderful quotes, funny scenes, beautiful songs, and it's a body of work that I think will just sustain
Yeah.
us in very difficult times. And to everyone who's feeling lonely, go watch a Shah Rukh song, and you.
Yes. And if you ever get invited to Mannat, please remember to bring us as like your security boy guards, and like, helper boys will lift your, and like we'll join you along.
You
That's
know,
what I wanted to say.
I will only say this to you. When I went to Manat, I thought I was meeting his manager only. I had no
Mhm.
idea that that he was going to be there. So
Oh my
that should
God.
give you a sense of
Yeah.
how unprepared I was. But he is. I will simply say, when I say he is a generous human being, he's like a generous world into himself. So it's. I think we're very fortunate, all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, then. So thank you so much, Shrayana.
Thank you.
Like we began like very in a fluid manner. Otherwise, the line which I had to ask you, what I was thinking of, what Shah Rukh Khan reference to drop in, and what could be more poetic than asking someone how is the balance of dard and disco in your life. So I think end on that note. Like I hope the balance of dard and disco in your life stays, I don't know, wholesome. But yeah, thank you so much for taking out time. Thank you. You're the first guest, by the way, on our
Thank
podcast.
Yeah, this
you.
is our first.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, this is our first.
Thank
We were
you.
struggling with putting together the technology for all of this and like all of that, and uh, building our
No,
chemistry
no,
also. So like,
it
thank you so
seems.
much for doing this.
Thank you so much. I wish you all the best with all your future conversations, and may there be only disco and no dard for everyone.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said.
Thank you so much, Shayana.
Bye.
That's bye bye. Take care.
Right.